freedom, including the right to make and carry out all decisions about pregnancy, such as parental care, childbirth, postpartum care, contraception, sterilization, abortion, miscarriage management, and infertility. Good? Keep going. Allow state to regulate abortion after fetal viability, but not prohibit
Hello, and welcome to St. John's second of our 2 town hall meetings regarding Proposal 3 that will be on the ballot on November 8th. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. My name is Jim Collegian, and I will be your MC for this event. Since we are in a place of worship, I would like to introduce you to Lori Pelleron, who will lead us in a small prayer. In the packet that you picked up when you came in the church, there is a prayer card so you can follow along. Lori, you want to come up?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim.
Oh, just a sec.
Okay. Let me know when. Okay. Thank you, Jim. We're going to be praying the prayer for life and right laws on this prayer card. Almighty, ever-living God, you bestow the gift of life as you form each of us in our mother's womb. Look on our nation, state, and community and awaken in every heart reverence for life. Protect our state from unjust laws. In your name, bring to defeat every attack against the sacredness of life. Safeguard the rights of parents whom you have entrusted with the care and formation of their children. Help all who believe in Jesus to proclaim the gospel of life to their neighbors. Dispel every anxiety and fear. Strengthen the bond between parents and their unborn child. May mothers and fathers accept and nurture the gift of life, made in your image and likeness. Our Lady, Queen of the Family, pray for us. Saint Michael the Archangel, pray for us. Saint Joseph, protector of the unborn, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. I want to start off this meeting. This meeting is not to try to turn anybody into Catholics. We have some people from other denominations. If you want to become a Catholic, we have other folks that can help you with that. However, this tonight is not really about abortion. This topic is about Proposal 3. Whether you're pro-abortion, pro-choice, pro-life, or somewhere in the middle, there's a lot of questions out there and misconceptions on what the proposal actually has in it. So we're hoping tonight to answer those questions and make sure everyone knows what they're doing when they go to ballot, November 8th to the ballot. So I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Kristen Smith. Now, give me a second here. I'm going to read you a really cool bio on her. She was an assistant attorney general for 18 years under Frank Kelly, corporate counsel for 3 years. She volunteered for Parish Holy Family in Grand Blanc. She was hired as witness to Hope Capital Campaign, helped Bishop Boyer and his team raise over $65 million, worked as a manager for Holy Family under the now Bishop Vinquier and Father Joe Krupp. Today, she is the executive director of the Catholic Community Foundation in Saginaw, which supports the Diocese of Saginaw parishes, schools, and ministries like seminary education, lay ministry formations, and the poor and needy. Welcome, Kristen. So, our night's is gonna kind of go in this fashion. You have a document that you were given when you came in the church. It's got 4 pages. There's also a white card inside of it. That's for questions. You should be able to find pencils and or pens in the pews. So as we go through this, jot down your questions. Kristen and I will go back and forth on what's in the proposal. There will become a time when we'll have someone come up. Maybe some of you have already voted. If you have, there is a way, let's say you change your mind after tonight, there is a way to spoil your ballot. And we'll discuss that. Then we'll take the questions, and our guest will be asked those questions, and she's very comfortable and well-versed in answering them. So we're excited that she's here and can't wait to hear her answers. After that, we will probably end about that, and Kristen's here till 9 o'clock. So we're gonna try to wrap this up around 8:30, and then she'll be out in the vestibule if you have any other questions that you want to talk to her about. Okay? So with that being said, we're gonna start off with a video. And it's a very good video, and it's actually put out by the Trinity Lutherans. So I think you'll enjoy it.
Michigan, this November 8th, you have the right to choose. And your choice will decide whether we wake up in a better Michigan or a Michigan that has been radically transformed.
Help me understand what's going on with you. You're just not yourself lately. Mom, 2 weeks ago I had an abortion. What? How? How is that possible? You're only 14. Your doctor didn't even tell me. My teacher said they wouldn't have to anymore since Prop 3 passed. I didn't know.
I just don't understand why my son wants to sterilize himself and there's nothing I can do about it.
What do you mean there's nothing you can do? He's only 10, and you're his mother.
Prop 3 passed and gave every individual the right to effectuate decisions about sterilization. His teacher told him that if he wants to transition, he can do this. There's nothing I can do. If he decides to go through with it, it's his choice.
I didn't know.
Thanks very much for coming in. Looking at all the tests, everything's going fine. Baby is very, very healthy. But I need to ask you before we go any further, are you sure this child is not going to cause you any mental health issues? Fear, anxiety, stress?
I mean, it's my 4th kid, so probably.
Well, if you feel that way, we can terminate this pregnancy for you.
How is that possible?
Well, now that Proposition 3 has passed, you know you have the right to terminate this pregnancy up to the time of a birth.
Really?
Yes, if it would be advisable for the protection of your mental health.
I didn't know.
You are the county prosecutor. My 15-year-old granddaughter is dead, and you tell me you can't do anything to the person who killed her?
I understand your frustration, but since Proposition 3 passed, the state shall not penalize, prosecute, or otherwise take adverse action against someone for aiding or assisting a pregnant individual in exercising their right to reproductive freedom with their voluntary consent. There's just nothing I can do.
I didn't know.
Hey babe, how was your day? What's wrong?
I had to perform an abortion today.
What? How is that even possible? You work for a Catholic hospital.
And Prop 3 passed and gave the mother the right to make and effectuate all abortion and postpartum care decisions. And she chose us, and we had to comply. I had to comply. It was her right, so.
I didn't know.
Michigan, Proposition 3 is dangerous for parental rights, religious liberties, our children, the unborn, the newly born, the preyed upon, and the abused. It's permanent and goes way beyond Roe. Proposition 3 is dangerous for our state, for our culture, and for our society. This November 8th, vote no to protect human life in all its forms. Vote no to protect the vulnerable. Vote no to protect parental rights, religious liberties, and medical and prosecutorial rights. Choose to give your child a Michigan and a future they deserve. On November 9th, don't wake up saying, "I didn't know." Choose to vote no on Prop 3, because now you know.
Pretty moving stuff, huh? So we're going to go through the language of the proposal that most of which you won't see on the ballot that describes what you just saw. So the first thing I'd like you to do is, in the 4-page flyer, the very first page, and some of this is, I'm just going to be reading through, we're going to be reading through, and you can follow along, okay? The very first page is what is on the ballot. So let's start there. This is Proposal 22-3, a proposal to amend the state constitution to establish new individual right to reproductive freedom, including right to make all decisions about pregnancy and abortion, allow state to regulate abortion in some cases, and forbid prosecution of individuals exercising established right. This proposed constitutional amendment would establish new individual right to reproductive freedom, including right to make and carry out all decisions about pregnancy, such as prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, contraception, sterilization, abortion, miscarriage management, and infertility. It would also allow the state to regulate abortion after fetal viability, but not prohibit it if medically needed to protect a patient's life or physical or mental health. It would also forbid state discrimination in enforcement of this right, prohibit prosecution of an individual or a person helping a pregnant individual for exercising rights established by this amendment. This would also invalidate state laws conflicting with this proposed amendment. And should this proposal be adopted? That's what you're going to see on November 8th. So that's 95 words. The actual proposal, if you turn to the page and you'll see where it says, where does it say that? The actual proposal is approximately 350 words. Now on this, we're going to go through these paragraphs. You will be able to see the paragraphs on your screen, so you can either follow along on the paper or on the screens. There are footnotes in each paragraph. Kristen's going to be addressing most of those. You can also follow along with many of her descriptions on the next page. The footnotes are there. This is a document that you can take home. Okay? So, let's see, is the first paragraph? Okay, the first paragraph is now on your screen. I'm going to read through it, and then we're going to go right to the footnotes. So every individual, and just one other note, this is online. Both of these are online in several different places where you can click on them and see this 95-word and then the 340-word. Every individual has a fundamental right to reproductive freedom, which entails the right to make and effectuate decisions about all matters relating to pregnancy, including, but not limited to, prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, contraception, sterilization, abortion care, miscarriage management, and infertility care. So, Kristen, that very first footnote, number 1, can you help us out there?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And as it says, an individual is an individual. It doesn't say adult, it doesn't say child. So essentially that's anyone, any age among us, man or woman. So that's an individual. It's not limiting at all to adults.
How about the fundamental right there, number 2?
Yeah. Okay, so the fundamental right is particular to the Constitution. A Constitution, when you make an amendment to a Constitution, it basically becomes set in stone. It is a fundamental right, and there's very little, if anything, that courts or the legislature can do to override it, put limits on it, or give any, if any, changes to the right that's put in a Constitution. So fundamental means pretty much locked in.
Okay. Now, we did another one of these meetings on Sunday, and many of the team have been talking to lots of different people as we put these, town hall meetings together. And very often the question of sterilization, what does that actually mean? That's number 3. You want to take that?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, sterilization is one of those permanent changes to a person's ability to reproduce. That means sterilization of men, women, boys, and girls. That would mean women or little girls changing their ability to ever have children in the future. Same thing for men or boys, changing permanently their ability to reproduce and have children in the future. Sterilization then could be applied to any individual.
So one of the pushbacks that people who are for this proposal, they don't like to hear the term gender reassignment, and no one likes to hear that term. But in essence, that is what it is. Isn't that right?
Yes, that would mean gender reassignment at any age, under any conditions, without parents being involved in that process, if it's with a child, a minor.
Okay, let's go to the next paragraph. An individual's right to reproductive freedom shall not be denied, burdened, nor infringed upon unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved. Oh, I got to go back. I got a question for you.
Okay.
On paragraph 1. Right in the middle, there's a clause in there that says, but not limited to.
Okay, that's your favorite lawyer word to put into any document you're ever writing. Because the including, but not limited to, means here's a list, but that doesn't mean that's the final list. That's not everything. Because it's not limited to this list, there may be something in the future that we haven't even contemplated that will arguably fall underneath this constitutional amendment if it's passed.
Thanks. So the second paragraph, an individual's right to reproductive freedom shall not be denied, burdened, nor infringed upon unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by the least restrictive means. You want to take that? Number 4?
Sure. So the real crux of this sentence is unless justified by a compelling state interest achieved by a least restrictive means. So therefore, what that means, every individual will have all these rights. They cannot be told no or in any way infringed upon these rights unless the state can come up with a compelling interest to interfere with those rights. This is the highest standard for overcoming a law like this. And something has to be compelling. It's usually because the state has an interest in protecting an individual. The individual being protected in this constitutional amendment is the individual seeking any of these fundamental rights that they've listed, which includes the abortion, the sterilization, and the contraception. So the compelling state interest applies to the person seeking this, not the unborn person who is potentially part of that abortive process, if that's one of those options that they choose under this right. So at this point in time, this is pretty much a locked in. There's nothing that can prevent or change what this constitutional amendment will accomplish if it's passed.
So that term compelling is a very subjective term
so the courts,
for the state?
Yeah, compelling is a standard of review, and the courts would have to look at what would compel the state to override this individual's right. And essentially, that is applied on a case-by-case basis when it's used in the term compelling state interest. And as the state has an interest in the individual, they're protecting that individual's interest. And so on a case-by-case basis, it's very difficult to see how the state would have a compelling interest greater than what this individual already is given under the statute.
Okay, thank you. So going to the next paragraph, where it starts off, notwithstanding the above, the state may regulate the provision of abortion care after fetal viability, provided that in no circumstance shall the state prohibit an abortion that, in the professional judgment of an attending healthcare professional, is medically indicated to protect the life of or physical or mental health of the pregnant individual. There's a lot there. Can you start with the term fetal viability?
Yes, so most of us have heard about fetal viability under other statutes that have been overturned with regard to when a child could survive outside of the womb. And in our current circumstances, surviving outside of the womb, it's allowed for that child to be in an incubator, get oxygen, be fed intravenously. So the viability issue becomes very important here because viability is going to be redefined, that the child is only viable if outside of the womb, it doesn't need any extraordinary care, like being in an incubator or getting oxygen or otherwise getting medical attention to help it survive or to help it thrive. So viability is a very significant change that we would see if this constitutional amendment is passed.
Okay, so the next part of that is interesting in itself, the healthcare professional. Who's a healthcare professional?
Well, we have a statute in Michigan that defines, I can't remember if it's 23 or 43 different professions that are considered healthcare professionals. In your writing, it gives you examples: dentists, acupuncturists, massage therapists, counselors, psychologists. There is a plethora of people who are defined to be healthcare professionals, not just doctors, not just nurses. So this actually opens the door for other individuals who are considered healthcare professionals under the state laws to perform abortions or sterilization or anything that we're talking about in this statute.
So we saw in the movie the doctor who has a pregnant lady in front of her, and she's on her fourth kid or fifth kid, and it's getting right down to it, and he tells her what it would be like if this was to pass. So at that point, she can say, I don't feel right in the head, and make a mental exception, and therefore have an abortion at any time.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And it doesn't have to be a doctor saying she has these health issues that are mental. It could be that other health professional. So yes, she could have an abortion right up and until she delivers.
So there's a lot of talk about, when should abortions be allowed and when shouldn't they? For instance, is it a human at conception? Should abortions be you know, at first trimester. There's, at the federal level, they're talking about saying no abortions after 15 weeks since Roe went down. Should it be before the second semester? Should it be when they feel pain? We had a doctor here on Sunday, and she said this would open the door for partial birth abortions. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but that's basically on the mental exception, as she put it. The woman would be able to, while she's delivering, saying, I can't take this, I can't take this. Mm-hmm. And that doctor would have to, or else he can be prosecuted, terminate that baby while it's coming out.
And just to clarify, how could the doctor be prosecuted for not performing an abortion? There's a legal term called unwanted birth. Unwanted, like he would be allowing something to happen that wasn't wanted by his patient, and doctors can get sued for that.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay, so moving to the next paragraph, the short one right underneath there. The state shall not discriminate in the protection or enforcement of this fundamental right. So we're back to that fundamental right again, aren't we? Okay. Mm-hmm. So the next paragraph, the state shall not penalize, prosecute, or otherwise take adverse action against any individual based on their actual, potential, perceived, or alleged pregnancy outcomes. Here's that term again, including but not limited to miscarriage, stillbirth, or abortion. Nor shall the state penalize, prosecute, or otherwise take adverse action against someone for aiding or assisting a pregnant individual in exercising their right to reproductive freedom with their voluntary consent. So, Kristen, does this mean that like a 14-year-old girl could go to her counselor and say, hey, I don't want this baby. Will you help me?
Yes.
And what ramifications, if any, does a parent have, or is there any ramifications that a counselor has? Could they get in any kind of trouble for any of that?
Can the counselor get in any trouble for that? No.
Okay. So there's nothing that, if this passes, that a parent could pursue charges against someone helping their daughter have that abortion.
That's correct. Essentially, a parent's right as a parent have been stripped away when it comes to anything regarding pregnancies, sterilization, all of the stuff that's in here.
Scary stuff. Okay. For the purposes of this section, a state interest is compelling, and if you notice, they use some of the same terms throughout here, and these are very, according to our attorney too, and according to the other attorneys we've had, these terms are very vague, and they're put there on purpose to be vague. A state interest is compelling only if it is for the limited purpose of protecting the health of an individual seeking care consistent with accepted clinical standards of practice and evidence-based medicine, and does not infringe on the individual's autonomous decision-making. Help me out there.
Yeah, this is that term of law that we spend days in constitutional law class figuring out. Because a compelling state interest means you can override the individual's interest. In this statute, it literally limits the state from deeming that there is an interest greater than that individual's decision. And essentially has taken what we would term as a compelling state interest, taken that authority out of the state to say, nope, that's not good for you.
So, if you guys are following along and you look at that footnote number 9, and basically all laws that we have infringe upon our autonomous actions. We have laws, speed limit laws. If you go 100 miles an hour, there's an infringement and there's something to happen. We all know what happens. So this is basically saying, help me here, that doesn't count here.
That's right. So where we have very good examples, we're told you can't drive 100 miles an hour at 75, 70 speed limit. A person may want to drive 100, but the state has a compelling interest of protecting the safety of the public. So they limit the speed limit to 70, 45, wherever you're at. In that case, you don't get to make your own decision. The state has said this is what's better for the whole community. In this instance, however, the state is being told you can't infringe if it violates that individual's independent right to make that decision. And they actually throw in some pretty good language here, voluntary consent. If there's a point for lawsuits and litigation, they don't define what voluntary consent is. You have to inform them. What is voluntary consent when you're going through any of these procedures? There is the Michigan already has on its books the type of things that have to happen before voluntary consent is deemed legal. So that's another trick they've put into this paragraph.
Okay, I've got another question for you. In this one, I look at this and it says in that paragraph, consistent with accepted clinical standards of practice in evidence-based medicine. I've never given birth, and for you moms that know, I'm assuming that most births are different in some way every single time. No one's exactly the same. So what is that?
Well, after what we've experienced over the last few years, it's hard to tell what evidence-based medicine is. I think there's already a debate, which has been on the books, about when viability, fetal viability. We learn more all the time. So a evidence-based medicine, if we're talking strictly legal, evidence-based, means you've had an expert come into a courtroom who's been deemed an expert, and his testimony becomes basically the law of that case. So you could have 50 different experts say 50 different things, and what then would be evidence-based medicine is up in the air.
So this appears to be another one of those, anything that goes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We already talked about fetal viability. I'm going to move on to the next paragraph, but it says here, fetal viability means the point in pregnancy when the professional judgment of an attending healthcare professional, and based on the particular facts of the case, there is a significant likelihood of the fetus's sustained survival outside the uterus without the application of extraordinary medical measures. What is extraordinary medical measures?
That's what we've all seen, babies in an incubator, maybe some oxygen, maybe a few days of feeding with a tube because they're not suckling properly. Anything that would assist that child in surviving, I believe, would fall underneath this extraordinary medical care.
Okay. So this next part seems very law-ish. Number 5, this section shall be self-executing. Any provision of this section held invalid shall be severable from the remaining portions of this section.
Mm-hmm.
Can you break that down for us?
Sure, that's standard legal lingo. That means if there is a challenge to this particular amendment and say one sentence or one word is deemed illegal or not, a judge says it's wrong, the rest of the statute still stands. So that could mean, we have 10 footnotes here, that could mean 10 different lawsuits. And each one of those, win or lose, this would still stand as much as was left standing at the end of a lawsuit. So just because one part of this would be stricken down, if in a lawsuit that happened, the rest of it would still continue.
Okay, so you've got your cards in your pamphlet there, and I'm hoping you're writing questions down. There are some, on the last page, there are some questions and answers for this, regarding this proposal 3. And I want to reiterate that we're here to discuss what's the difference between what's on the ballot and what's really in the proposal, so that you have the information and are armed to talk to other people. It's not just for you to be informed here, and I hope you are, but we're also hoping that you go out and talk with other folks. I personally know my neighbor has a young lady, and she thinks that the new proposal is just what Roe was. And I think several of us in our group have mentioned that too. What you can see is when Roe was around, you still had to call the parents and get parental consent. There was still a 24 to 48-hour waiting period to think about it. So this is a lot more than Roe. And if you look online and you look at the commercials that are being played, even on the billboards, a billboard says, Michigan wants Roe. Well, this isn't Roe.
No, it's not.
It's a lot more. So, do you have any additional, before I call April up?
Just to the extent I would follow up on that, this actually goes farther than Roe. We have on the books a 1931 abortion ban. That'll be gone for sure. Parental consent for minors would no longer be valid. Right now we have that only physicians can perform abortions, and medical health care facilities, the facilities at which these abortions are performed, have some regulation to try to make sure that they're sterile and clean like any other, quote, hospital would be. Those would no longer be applicable. The informed consent provisions will be wiped out. There won't be any 24-hour waiting period. There won't be any requirement to have an ultrasound to show them who is being aborted or what the abortion will do to the pregnancy. We right now have a ban on partial birth abortions. That will be eliminated. Right now we have a prohibition on taxpayer-funded abortions. That will be eliminated. Now the taxes will start paying for it. It's a fundamental right if this passes. And there are many, many other provisions that over the years, citizens, people, the legislature have felt were important for the women who were making decisions, except for under this, it'll be individuals, so it could apply to men or women, depending upon their age and anyone. So there's been a lot of work over the years to really look at what the state interest is, and every single one of those will be wiped out. This will completely replace all the work that's been done and the work that has sought to protect women and the infants who have survived partial birth abortions or have survived abortions, and the requirement to give them medical care. All that will be eliminated if this statute is passed, or if this amendment is passed.
And that's another part, and I'm glad you mentioned on that, and is the taxpayers. If you look at the first paragraph, and then think about your taxes, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but your taxes would now pay for, right here in the middle, everything relating to pregnancies, including, and then but not limited to, which Kristen has informed us that anything could come up in the future, and your tax-paying dollars are going to go to that too, because this is an amendment. But it would go, your taxpayer dollars would go to prenatal care, childbirth, postpartum care, contraception, and there we are again with sterilization. Your taxpayer dollars could go to your neighbor's 10-year-old boy who is going through a gender reassignment. So those clauses, Kristen, but not limited to, also in both paragraph 1 and paragraph 3, basically leaves it wide open for them to use our taxpayers' dollars for whatever comes up.
That's correct. And let me point out something very subtle here. Our taxpayer dollars already pay for prenatal care. We already help women with prenatal care through different government organizations. We already help pay for childbirth. We already provide, when I say we, our taxpayer money already provides for postpartum care. There are some things that we will pay, that the taxpayers pay for contraception. Very few things are paid for the sterilization. It's the abortive care. They call it abortive care. That is what the law says right now that the taxpayers don't pay for. So really, this is intended to squeeze that one in. We already help women with miscarriage management, And we already have some infertile care covered for by taxes. So there's really one focus for this paragraph in how taxes will literally pick up one thing that's really not being covered. Or maybe there's a couple of them in here. But we already really do get good care and get help from the government through various organizations that governments fund. So this is kind of a way to, oh, we want to get this one in too, but we're going to tell you we don't pay for any of the other things. But we actually do in our taxes.
So at this time, we're going to invite April. Is she here? April Snyder? Okay.
So we can do questions.
Okay. So April Snyder was going to talk about how to void your ballot if you've already done a ballot and you want to make some changes. So I heard her presentation the other night, and there's also out on our tables out there is instructions on how to go about that process. For the most part, you need to go to your county clerk and tell them you did an absentee ballot and you want to spoil it. They will give you a new ballot. They're supposed to, if I understand it right, take your ballot and rip it up in front of you, the old one, and you'll be allowed to re-vote. I just don't remember how many days before the November 8th ballot. I think there was a, does anybody remember what that was? Everybody hear that? So in this case, you would have to do this by November 4th in order to spoil your ballot and re-vote if you wanted to make a change. But it's basically going to your county clerk and telling them that this is what I want to do. Bring your ID and so forth, and you can. A lot of people don't realize you can do this. So this is an opportunity if you go out and, you know, this is passionate to you, like I hope it is, and it's passionate to lots of people, and people say, oh, I already voted. There is a way to spoil that ballot, and it's basically going down to the clerk's office. Yeah. That's a good point, real good point. Yep. Yeah, so check out wherever you're voting, your clerk's office. Just know that you can do it, and you just need to go there, and you can call them too, and they'll tell you exactly step by step on how to do it. And you can change your vote. Okay?
I think I want to be really critical about the idea that your clerk's office could be closed on Friday. A lot of the offices, government offices, have pulled back on some of their hours, and it is the Friday before the election, and that is the law. You have up until Friday at 5 o'clock before the election to spoil your ballot. And if you know the law but you don't know your clerk's office hours, that really could be you got to get in there by Thursday. So just be mindful. If you talk with people, they've already done it, the sooner the better. It makes a big difference. The sooner the better.
Okay. We've got some questions. And I'm going to ask our valued guest. The first one is an interesting one. The question is, if these rights are for children, how can we convince parents that they will not be able to make decisions for their minor child? That could not happen is an argument. And I think that kind of goes back earlier when I said I was talking to my neighbor and his daughter said, this could never happen. The federal government won't let this happen to children. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
So the first thing that came up is like, I don't know if this is a proper term, but it's a straw man argument. Oh, no, that'll never happen. That really almost relinquishes the responsibility to understand the importance of what's happening. Let's just make sure it doesn't happen. That's maybe what if we don't know who's in charge and how that will happen. Let's make sure, help them walk through their responsibilities as a parent and say, protect them today. Don't wait and see like that'll never happen. Because usually it happens. So when you're talking with parents, in my opinion, you appeal to their love for their children. They love their children. They don't want to see them get hurt. And it's their primary responsibility to protect their children. And oftentimes we can help minister to them and give them the confidence to say, yes, you're the parent. Yes, you can take action now to ensure 5 years from now, 10 years from now, your child isn't in a class where all of a sudden this becomes the whole terms discussion about transitioning or all this other stuff we hear in the news, and the kid's like, yeah, but I really want to do this. I know this will be best for me, and they're 10 years old, and you're like, yeah, no, honey, it's not going to be good for you, but the law's already passed. There's nothing they can do. So I think this is a straw man argument. Let's stand up now for our children and make the decision now for our children and not be stuck with whatever happens later that we have to try to help heal and console them as to a decision they might not realize when they're 10. When they're 25, they'll go, why did you let that happen? And then what's the parent's going to say? I didn't know.
So April is here, so
Awesome.
she knows this way better than I do, so I'm going to ask her to come up. And is the mic on the podium working? Okay. You can do that one?
Please do.
So I am by far not an expert, but I have learned a lot about this. If you have voted and you want to change your vote, you can do what they call spoiling a ballot. And that means that they basically cancel your ballot out and they give you a new one. So if you have your ballot in hand, there's two options. You can turn it into the city clerk's office by 4 p.m. the Monday before the election, so the night before. It has to be there by 4. That's if you actually have it, if you haven't mailed it in. Or you can take it to your actual polling location and turn it into one of the poll workers at your precinct. It has to be at the actual location that you vote at. And they will spoil it. You should see them put it into an envelope, and then they'll give you a new one so that you can vote in person. They'll have you sign something saying that you want to have that vote count instead of the original mail-in ballot that they gave you. If you do not have it, you can send in the request by mail, but it has to be received by a week from Friday, the 4th, by 5 o'clock. Or you can go in person to your city clerk's office by 10 o'clock on Monday. That's if you do not have it anymore, like if you've already mailed it in. If you think that it's lost, I strongly encourage you to call your city clerk's office to make sure they have not received it. Because if you think that it's lost and you're just going to go to your polling location that day, they will call the city clerk to find out if it was turned in. And if it was turned in by someone, let's say you've got a neighbor or granddaughter, somebody that helps you fill it out, and they've thought you were finished and they turned it in for you, there's nothing you can do at that point. It's too late. So if you can't find it and you know you had one, I strongly suggest you call the clerk to find out if they have it. If not, you can show up at your polling location. They'll have you sign something saying that you had one but it was lost, and then you'll be able to vote. We do have some pieces of paper back there that have all that information. I know it's a lot. It's got the dates and the times on there. And if you have any other questions that I can't answer, I will try to get you the person that can. So,
thank you. Okay. We'll continue with the questions here.
Thank you. Glad you made it.
Let's get rid of that one. Okay, so where's that one here? What would be the abortion laws? Let me back up. So I'm thinking everyone knows that since Roe versus Wade, each state has to make their own decisions based on their laws and based on the people going and voting. So when Roe was dropped, our governor and our attorney general went to court to try to get an injunction to say, hey, we want abortions until this voting period. They were turned down, so they went to a higher court. And that court was very pro-abortion, the individual, and they got the injunction put in. So people can go to Planned Parenthood right now and have an abortion. So the question comes up is, what happens, what would be the abortion laws in Michigan if this proposal doesn't pass?
Good question. So if it doesn't pass, the game's not over yet. Those who want this to pass have a backup plan. And the backup plan is to follow through on those lawsuits that are pending right now, sitting in a little box, waiting to see what happens in November, excuse me. So if this does not pass, and we have our law that's been on the books about abortion, it's still under an injunction. But that hasn't finished the legal process of getting up to the Supreme Court yet. So the attempt to make sure that the injunction becomes permanent will go through to the Supreme Court, and we'll see briefs, and it'll be up to the Supreme Court to decide whether or not to make the injunction right now that's preventing the state laws from being followed, meaning there would not be abortions allowed. That is their backup. That is the backup plan, that if this doesn't follow, it's not over. It's not over.
And correct me if I'm right or wrong on this, so the injunction could be reinstated until perhaps 2 more years, when they may modify this and come back with another attempt.
That could potentially happen. Whether it's a couple years or not, that's usually the court's docket, depending upon how active the court is and if it leans one way or the other. Usually the court, though, once they have a case active and the injunction hearings, the appeals on the injunction begin, the court won't let that last long. They usually like to decide their cases before the end of their term. So 2 years, I think, would be a stretch. But you bet, while that's going on, another attempt could be made to make it happen so that the abortions could be for everyone all the time. It's not over. Just because this work is going to continue, win or lose, it will continue. Yeah. Sure. So our Constitution is basically the bedrock of our laws. Once it's passed for the Constitution, you're pretty much locked in. There's been several attempts made since 1963 to amend the Constitution. There's been enough successful amendments, but there's also been those amendments that have been shot down. One of those was the one for assisted suicide. That they tried to put that in the Constitution, and that was voted down. Now the voting only has to be 51 to 50, and it passes and it becomes permanently in the Constitution. A law, on the other hand, if you're talking about a law that passes and it becomes a constitutional amendment, we've got a couple different processes here. So the legislature can actually amend the Constitution, but they need a supermajority or 2/3. That's a different way of coming to amending the Constitution. However, when the legislature passes the law, you've got your representatives representing you, and that process, once a law is passed, can be challenged by the courts, and the courts can overturn that law much easily than ever being able to overturn a constitutional amendment. In fact, frankly, I've been out of law school for a couple dozen years. I don't remember from con law if anything in the Constitution was ever overturned by a court. So that's how fundamental it is. In order to reverse that, we would have to go through this whole thing all over again, get enough petitions to get on the ballot, and then have the people vote to remove it from the Constitution. There could be a very rare option that the state would convene a constitutional convention, which means the whole Constitution would be opened up and all that stuff could be looked at and possibly rewritten. Since 1963, I think there's been either 3 or 4 attempts to convene a constitutional convention to actually rewrite anything in the Constitution. So once it's there, we're pretty well locked in. There's nobody that can overturn it unless we go through another ballot proposal to undo it.
Okay, great. This question came up at the last town meeting, and I'm going to read it twice. And if you're good with taking it, great. If not, I will just kind of repeat what the doctor said.
Okay.
Okay? So the question is, if this does not pass, is an ectopic abortion allowed? The doctor, and I'll say that again, if this does not pass, is an ectopic abortion allowed? Do you want me to take that?
I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
An ectopic pregnancy is where the fetus or the newly forming child actually plants into a fallopian tube, somewhere other than the uterus. That then there becomes a health issue for the mother. That is very, very dangerous. And the viability of that child actually making it to term, not going to happen. So essentially, the word ectopic pregnancy and abortion really to me, don't belong in the same paragraph. But yes, it's talked of that way. An ectopic pregnancy is a medical condition that affects the life of the mother. Very, very dangerous. And the possibility that that child would actually come to term, absolutely next to none. Now, I'm not a doctor, but that's what I understand. So even currently right now, that is permitted currently under our current laws. If there is an ectopic pregnancy, that is permitted to remove that fetus or embryo from that fallopian tube. That's just because it's the health of the mother, for sure.
And that's what the doctor on Sunday said. Exact same thing was, that's a health condition. That is, anything can go wrong with a pregnancy. And an ectopic pregnancy is something that is not right. And it is the mother's health, and that's how the laws are today, that allow her to, if it's going to kill her, she can have an abortion. And the mother's life does come first today. So it's kind of a little bit different animal, even though I know people are talking about it. According to the doctor, she said that is a condition. That's not whether or not I want an abortion, or I don't want to tell my parents because I'm 14. Okay?
In fact, if I may, I'd be even surprised if the medical procedure for removing the fallopian tube is actually called an abortion. I'd be very surprised. So I don't know that, but those two words then really don't belong together. Ectopic pregnancy and abortion do not belong together, actually. So.
And she also mentioned that...
I don't mean any offense to whoever asked the question. It's a great question.
It is. The doctor also mentioned that when a woman has that, it really depends on how far along she is, her medical condition, if she has diabetes, if she has a whole host of different things. It is now a medical emergency condition. So it kind of removes it from this realm. Okay. And I don't know the answer to this one. I haven't heard much. But if a teenage girl gets an abortion without her parents' knowledge or consent, how is that abortion paid for if parents have insurance? I want to repeat that because our streamline people, or the streamers that are watching, we're not coming through as clear. So, again, the question is, if a teenage girl gets an abortion without her parents' knowledge or consent, how is that abortion paid for if parents have insurance?
I'm not going to get into insurance law because the statute says taxpayers pay for it. So maybe I'm just going to guess. I'm an administrative type of person. 14-year-old comes in. The teacher, the neighbor, the nail tech, I don't know if they're a health profession, so I'm just kind of exaggerating, brings them to a clinic where they can abort the child. That clinic or wherever they are fills out the paper, submits it to the state, they get their money. And I don't know anything about insurance law. I have no idea. That could be a great argument for a parent to say, how could that happen? I have insurance and blah, 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 blah. Not going to matter. Very simple. Submit a voucher for it. The state will pay for it. Taxpayer money. They'll probably, if this passes, which we pray it does not, probably appropriate so many millions of dollars, and all you have to do is be a vendor for the state of Michigan and submit your vendor voucher and you'll get your payment, probably electronically transferred too. You don't even have to cash a check.
And Krista makes a good point in this. If there's one thing you take from this is the 350-word proposal, there's a lot of unknowns.
Yep.
And because there's legal, but not limited to, several times, and from some of the other things she mentioned, we don't know all the answers. And you can read all you can online, and they'll say, we don't know, we'll have to wait till the courts get their hands on it. Okay. This one is, if a healthcare professional determines that she thinks abortion, sterilization, contraception, etc., is recommended for an individual, could you see a person being forced to take said recommendation? So let me read that again. If a healthcare professional determines that she thinks abortion, sterilization, contraception, etc., is recommended for an individual, could you see a person being forced to take said recommendation?
Yes.
Why?
The emotional state of the person, the influence that other healthcare professional may have over them, the expectation of the individual to please someone. I mean, we can get into psychology that will probably pack up the courts for 100 years to determine what voluntary consent is. It is a psychological landmine that I just don't want to touch it. Yes, they would end up following through with whatever that healthcare profession recommends. Most of us put a little trust in our doctors or those who have some type of authority or training or license, whether it's the right thing to do or not. And even if you're 14, if you've seen your parents trust the doctor who just did a surgery to fix your leg, you trust healthcare professionals. That child may be under that assumption, well, I can trust them, they know what's better for me. So, yeah, that one just, my mind could go on and I could talk for hours under what type of circumstances that would happen. So that's very scary.
Okay, this is a long one, so let me...
While you're reading that, and imagine that, if the parent finds that out and wants to challenge voluntary consent, bring the kid into court, the kid has to testify, they got mom and dad on one side and the person they trusted on the other. Are you kidding me? I don't know how many courts would want to actually handle a case like that and go, what just happened? They did not know that this could open up that door. How many parents wouldn't, if they found out, want to say, I'm taking them to court? Well, this says you can't be held responsible or liable or sued. So maybe they couldn't even take them to court. My prayer would be that they would find a way to help that child heal. And I don't know what else to say. That's a tough one.
Okay, so this is going to be the last one because Kristen's been so kind to come. She came a long ways to get here. So I'm going to break this up in a few different parts. If parental consent is not needed, how many underage abortions are allowed for each individual before someone takes note? Does it matter? Or we've all heard that some people use abortion as contraception. So is there any, I don't see anything in there that says there's no limit.
There's no limit in this statute, in this constitutional amendment.
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat that because I was asked to. If parental consent is not needed, how many underage abortions are allowed for each individual before someone takes note? So it's wide open.
It's wide open. And if I may interject here, those of you may or may not have heard about sex trafficking and young children and young girls being sex trafficked. Happens that they get pregnant. What if that becomes the preferred choice of keeping this young girl in the sex trafficking business by taking them into an abortion place and their parents don't need to be notified? We are really opening up a very dangerous additional danger that those young girls face in sex trafficking. It's repulsive. It's just, I can't even imagine. And I mean, I'm going to be a little bit, what if it's 6, 7, or 8, and all of a sudden this young girl can't survive any more of them, and that little girl happens to die? Or she's now 17 or 18 and she dies. No prosecution, doesn't matter. That life has just been kicked to the curb, and we don't even know if she was going to even get a proper burial. This is very, 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 very serious of what we're facing here and the decisions that are being made on November 8th.
Okay, so there is Michigan, this proposal is one of the, considered one of the most harsh in the nation. However, there's California and there's New York that are right up there. And there's a term that they want to put into their proposal, which is called not prenatal, but perinatal. And perinatal is, in some definitions, but it's loose in that it's 2 weeks before birth and it's 2 weeks after. And advocates for it say there's a lot of poor mothers out there that have babies that don't have the resources, the families, the education to take care of that baby, and they're so distraught that they can put it in a dumpster and not be prosecuted for it. So the question on this other card is, in this Michigan one, I have not seen the term perinatal, but it is in the California one and the New York one. I don't know if you want to add something to that.
I've got 2 responses to that, including but not limited to. We just picked up perinatal after this state constitution if it gets adopted. But let's back up. Today, under the laws of the state of Michigan, we have what's called a safe delivery law. A mother can give birth to the child and relinquish it to the state, no questions asked. None whatsoever. So there's 2 sides of that. What do we have now? And including but not limited to just became perinatal.
Okay, last question. So for sterilization, it's a long process, so since my child doesn't need parental permission, but I as a parent have to put up with all the changes in the hormonal adjustments, but I didn't agree to this, so I still need to support financially and emotionally this child. That's a long one, so let me read that again. For sterilization, it's a long process, so since my child doesn't need parental permission, but I as a parent have to put up with all the changes in the hormonal adjustments, but I didn't agree to this, so I still need to support financially and emotionally this child. In other words, I think that's saying, will taxpayer dollars keep coming? I don't know if that's the question exactly, but you can answer it to your best.
So as I hear the question, yes, Bobby goes in, he's 10 years old, he wants to start transitioning. Someone takes him to whatever clinic, whatever they call it, who's not the parent, and now this young child is getting hormone treatments. Now the child is going through all different hormonal things that's happening in the home. The drugs continue. The state continues to pay for it. The parents have a hard time adjusting to this, and yeah, they're going to have to probably continue it. My guess is if I were to follow this through with my imagination, parents really don't want to. Guess what? Child Protective Services steps in. You're not following the Constitution. This individual has the right to transition. And by the way, you are now under a court order to make sure this kid gets their medicine on time, has all their prescriptions filled, and that you're buying them the appropriate clothes. You have just now invited the government into raising your child. That's what this could do.
Pretty strong stuff. So I promised I would keep this to an hour and a half, hour and 15 minutes, and we're right there. So I'm going to wrap this up. So we hope your questions, were answered. We hope that you're now comfortable with the information to not only vote no on Proposal 3, but to go out and talk about Proposal 3. Talk to your family members. Talk to your, at your kids' sports events, at your other churches, at your congregations. Talk to your pastors. See if they will do something like this. The pastors in Davison, regardless of the denomination, are very well respected. It's our job, if you're passionate about this, is to do something with this. Yes, vote no, but please take this further. There is out on the table, a table full of, I've got a whole bunch of stuff here. Some information on why to vote no, Proposal 3. Vote no, it's too confusing. There's a really good one, I think it's really good, and Father Andrew helped us with this along with a couple other people. We mixed some stuff.
Yellow too.
And it says, ask yourself this. So, my neighbor's daughter, who's like 28 years old, thinks that this is all hogwash. And he proceeds to talk to her, and the mother's talking to her. So he was very, very happy he came Sunday night because he wanted something to put towards his argument besides him saying, abortion's terrible. He says, I need more. So there's a great questionnaire. It's only like 4 or 5 questions that you can hand to somebody and say, answer these, and then think about your decision. So maybe, there's some people out there, we all know them, they don't want to talk to you about this. It's too decisive.
Yep.
There's a bunch of stuff out there for that. There's lots of signs. Feel free, these are all free. Take these home, put them in front of your businesses, in front of your houses. Okay, we really want to promote this.
If I may offer one suggestion on if you're looking to try to help people, this is a very personal issue. This is an issue that we've been talking about in society for many, many, many years. This often triggers a lot of consternation, a lot of adversity. This one piece of paper, I've got the yellow copy that asks questions. If you're prone to actually want to try to talk to somebody that might be like really, nope, don't want to talk to you, don't want to say, okay, I won't talk to you. We won't talk. But would you take this in your own home, when you get 5 minutes, you decide for yourself, I just would like to invite these questions, and you don't need to tell me, I just would ask you, would you please at least, I wouldn't even say please, just take these into it and you decide. Because they could be going through some of their own own personal reasons for other things, but if they are asked to just, here, I've got something here, may I just leave this with you? Would you just take 2 minutes to take a look at this? That's all you've got to do. You don't have to try to convince them otherwise, because I think the way they ask these questions is very compelling. It would be very difficult for me to see many people actually read these and say, sure, I want all this to happen. I mean, that's just our human nature, how much we care about each other, and we hope everyone cares about the unborn. So,
very well said. And I want to thank Kristen, our guest speaker, Kristen Smith, for coming all the way from Saginaw.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
I want to thank our audiovisual group. They did a great job setting everything up. I want to thank the office personnel, the ushers, Lori Miles and her team for everything she does. And I want to put a shout out to Judy Hendricks for leading us to this, her with Father Andrew. And most of all, I want to thank you guys for being here, for all of you being here. I hope it was worthwhile. I hope you take it to heart and let it go further than this room here. Okay? So we're in a church. We're going to finish with a prayer. Kristen, since you're our guest speaker, do you want to finish with Our Father, or do you want me to do it?
Sure, I'd be happy to. We would just invite us to come into the presence of the Lord and ask our Savior Jesus Christ to join us in the prayers that he taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Again, Kristen will, amen, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Kristen will be here for probably another half hour. She has a long drive, so if you have additional questions, feel free to ask her. There's other parishioners here too. You can talk to them about any of the pamphlets out there, but those are all free and they're all to go home. So, where can you see that? I thought about this, and Lori, I don't know if there's or somebody, one of the ushers or something, can flip over one of the documents. If you want to leave your email there, we will email that.
I know where to find it.
Or you can Google it.
Yeah.
And it's on YouTube, and it's called I Didn't Know.
Yes, thank you, Jan.
Okay.
I was going to say you can go to the Diocese of Lansing website. Oh, the one that we're recording tonight? Oh, that I don't know.
Gene? Okay, I'm sorry.
It'll be on Facebook sometime, posted soon. Okay.
By midnight tonight, he said. So if you want to watch it again, I appreciate you saying that. That's great. And did you have something to say?
Well, I wanted to say one thing. We have a scenario of maybe people getting abortions. I happen to be a retired registered nurse, and I don't know if you know, we have to take human trafficking and we went to other classes. And the woman that did her human trafficking actually worked as a nurse in, to help the people be recovered. And she told us many stories of women who were trafficked, who were taken by their handlers, no decision making, directly to Planned Parenthood, who did an abortion on them.
So what she's saying is that she's been a nurse all her life, and she would have people come in and they were being trafficked, and they would take them directly to Planned Parenthood. Their handlers.
And no choices by the woman.
And no choices for the abortion. So if you think there's not forced abortions, you can look into human trafficking, and there's a lot of information.
Yep.
So
thank you, Jim.
I want to thank everybody, most of you guys here, everybody, and Kristen, and everybody else that helped out. Again, feel free to congregate. You're here.
Yeah, I'll be here. All the questions are answered until at least 9 o'clock. I think by 9 o'clock I'll be on the road again. Okay. Thank you very much, Jim. Good night.